Welcome to our first session.
Well, I didn't really want to be here.
It wasn't requested by you. In any case, I think you need it.
I suppose I don't really have a choice, do I?
Good. Tell me about why you're here.
Well, it's art this time. That is what this is about, right?
Maybe. Tell me about this art.
Art has come in many forms. Now it spans back years, decades. At this point, as long as humans have been around in the form that we are in currently, art has always been there side by side, at least to the extent of expressing yourselves. Now, art can be found in many places, in many things that surround us every single day. It would start from places like caves. Some of the oldest works of art from humans has been found in caves. These things in some way help us connect with peoples that are long far gone. Some of these works of art are very, very, very old. And when you look at them, it helps you almost connect with the mind, the imaginations of who the peoples would have been at the time. Now, I wanted to start with cave paintings specifically, not just because they are so old, but when you look at them, you are able to see specific things from the past. Animals, in fact, in many cases, that aren't around anymore, that were around at the time, who have been illustrated through the mind of a human from that point in time. Someone who would have taken what they had seen and wanted to express that and expressed it their way. So you are in some way seeing their handwriting, but it's their art. Now, when it comes to art, you could look at any painting that we have at this point in time. You could look at modern art. You could look at historical stuff. And what you always end up seeing are what the artist at the time envisioned in their own mind. That was in that mind of that person. Now, whatever's in their imagination and whatever it's based on, that really doesn't matter. It's just they decided to express themselves in that way. And when they did that, it could be anything that they drew. So you would have paintings at times that would be of animals, illustrations of specific points in time, events, and other things that you would see would be leaders, significant figures who would have either their own drawings done or someone would come in and want to have them last through time. And what you would see are that artist's own handwriting, which art will always carry, well, in its current form, will always carry that human being's handwriting. The most important part of a drawing, a painting, is always the person who is able to take something from reality, bend it within their own mind, and then reconstruct it for us to enjoy. It's amazing that we were able to think that far ahead so far back in time, to the point where, there are many caves with paintings that the first thing that crossed your mind is, I wonder what it is about that scene that they wanted to express. What did that mean to that person? Where they thought, I want this to last. I want this to be seen. Maybe not by the future peoples. They may have not thought that far, but it lasted that long and it got that far. Something that those artists may have never even thought about, yet here it is. We have drawings. We have images of many locations that have had these gorgeous, beautiful remnants of the past. Something that is in some ways underrated would be a word for it, but it's an important part of what art is to a human being. It's a way in which that we express ourselves. The next thing that I wanted to look into were historical paintings. Now, I mentioned this in the first part a little bit, but I'll get into a little bit more here. Historical arts come in quite a few forms. Many of the works that we see throughout time, again, as I mentioned before, were leaders, important historical figures. At the time would have been a royal prince or a lord, a scene of a battle that had happened, of a knight. Things like that were very important to illustrate. These would have been prized by those important figures, but in some ways it's a beautiful way to look back in time and see people as they would have been back then. Some of the greatest pieces of knowledge that we can still hold on to come from illustrations, works of art that have stayed, that still teach us about ways in which people thought, ways in which people dressed. Fashion has transcended time in so many ways, but some of the most beautiful ways to actually see that have been through paintings and drawings. The way that those artists decided to portray that moment in time through themselves and their hands, they were able to create these images. Nowadays, you take your phone out, you take a picture, and then you forget about that picture. Back then, that one drawing that would have taken hours, days at times, those works of art were cherished. And to this day, in some ways, they are cherished. They are seen as almost like time travel, being able to go back and see it as it would have been back then, the colors that were used, and so on. There is something beautiful about, and haunting in some ways, about seeing how things were portrayed back then as opposed to now. There is one other part that I want to add to and this kind of just goes into all kinds of art, I think, but I wanted to add it to the historical part very specifically, and it's that artists are never appreciated for their work.
So, okay, hang on. I'm kind of lost. What relevance does this have?
I will get into that part. Just give me a second. I will get into that part. Almost never appreciated for their work. They will have groups of people who will hold their works, nowadays at least, in some high regard. At the time, politicians and royals saw and sought after very specific painters who they knew by name were to be great, great artists, who they wanted to come in and draw them in the best form that they can and portray them in the best light that they can. At the time, their recognition would have been for vanity, the vanity of the royals, not of the artist. Many artists grew up poor and stayed poor up until their death. Now, one of the artists that I held in really high regard while I went through school and so on, the little that I did get to learn from art and so on, and the different courses that I was in, Van Gogh was quite important in at least a lot of the lessons that I took and the stuff that I personally took away. You had a broken human being, someone who was unwell, let's just say. This was a person who needed help in many ways and was poor, whose work was just them expressing themselves. That is all their art would have been. Many years after they had passed away, their artwork, which now is seen as these beautiful pieces that are sold for millions. The originals are sold for many, many millions. It's funny to see that when the artists themselves could have lived on a fraction of that. They would have done anything to get a fraction of that just to live. Those artists died without ever even being recognized for their work. Only many years later were they ever considered as artists, the great ones, the ones that we look back to. That never happened during their time. And thankfully, that doesn't happen anymore to an extent, but it's a shame. It's definitely a shame. Now, this part is a little bit fascinating to get into. It's an unfortunate aspect of art, but being that it's an expressive form of, being that it's so deep rooted in self-expression, art has allowed for many things to be presented to the world. One man, one woman, one human being can sit down and present you with a piece of work that can change how you perceive whatever that may come your way. And I specifically point to propaganda.
Hang on. You're talking about propaganda, right? So who? Like the government? You can't possibly believe that, right? I mean, they wouldn't do such a thing.
You of all people should know that they can't be trusted. You should know that. Now, in this day and age, we look at propaganda in a very comedic way. It's all a joke. Politicians are a meme, something to be laughed at, something that young people will look at and just go, oh, yeah, that's happening anyway. But propaganda, when you look into it throughout history has been a fascinating part of how the world was shaped, the way people interacted with one another, the way that they perceived one another, the stereotypes that were around. Many would have never even interacted with each other, which now we do freely every single day. You can go online and see any and all types of people. At the time, that was not the case. You couldn't see everyone that freely. It was just what was presented to you, be it in movies and so on. And propaganda was extremely strong. And it was one of the main ways that you would see all kinds of ideas being sold to you. This has happened throughout time in some ways, but it is especially so deep rooted in how art is taught to kids in this day and age. It's deep rooted in the 1900s and has been since, even more so in art, that to this day you have pamphlets handed around that people don't pay attention to, that are designed in a very specific way to sell you an idea, to sell you a message. That message comes in any and all forms, not just a pamphlet. Back in the day, it would have just been a pamphlet, and that pamphlet alone would have shaped how you acted. A whole way of life was shaped by a piece of paper that had a very specific design put together by an artist. Now, imagine that your whole way of life was directed by a piece of paper with a design on it. Film and animation, which for as long as it's been around has been a fascinating thing which now is so deeply rooted in how we express ourselves. In this day and age, it is everything that we do. The idea of taking a picture, sharing that with the whole world, a video, which is a matter of a single button away from you. It's a single click, and then you have yourself high quality images, motion pictures. Back in the day, it would have been a grueling process. Now, film has come a long way in its storytelling, the way in which it tells that story, and the types of things that it likes to tell you. Film and animation, both in many ways, are such an integral part of art, where animation is much more drawing based, or at least would have been. With film, there are other aspects of it that make it so much more artistic. There are shots, very specific shots from old movies that you can find, very specific ones, and I'll try and put up pictures of them here. There are shots of them that you can see that alone, a single frame is able to tell you so much about what is happening. From the way that the characters move that tell you a story. The fact a single screen, a single picture from a movie could tell you that is exactly the point of art. There are so many aspects of the real world, life around us that we don't really pay attention to, that are fueled by art. Artists come in all shapes and sizes, all forms, and they express themselves in so many different ways. From little doodles, little drawings on a piece of paper, to grand paintings on a canvas, to structures that surround us every single day. Artists come in all forms, and they express themselves in that much more. And they express themselves in that and much more. Animation, at least for me, has been a very important part of who I am in some ways. For me, I grew up with Pixar, at least some of the works of Pixar. Animation is a very big part of who I am. For me, it has shaped the way that I appreciate certain ways in which that we tell stories. I grew up on silly cartoons. Many of us did, and many of us still kind of do. But back in my time, things like Tom and Jerry were held in very high regard, and still are. They are amazing works that have stood time. It has defied the idea that it will age and it'll be left behind. To this day, you can still look back. Anyone can see those cartoons and still appreciate what it is able to sell you. A silly little story. For me, I grew up on dubbed cartoons, Japanese cartoons that were then dubbed to Arabic, that would have then been dubbed to Kurdish. I would take those cartoons and I would watch them as much as I could anytime that they were on TV. And I loved them. I loved those. And as you went along and as time would pass and as I traveled and, here I am in Britain, I was able to appreciate something more because at the time it would have been 2D art. I was able to appreciate 3D. The 3D that I'm talking about is, well, now it's very old. It's dated. You can look back at many of the cartoons of the time, 90s and so on, the early 2000s, some of which I had on VHS, by the way. Those were the things that I grew up on. And certain things like Monsters, Inc. Now, I mentioned that very specifically because there was something beautiful about that story and what it was trying to tell you, that what I took away from it personally. There is a gorgeous way in which we are able to take very silly ideas that are drawn on a piece of paper and we can design these things to come to life. We are able to bring these things to life and sell you a story that, well, it's just for a kid, right? But artists are able to do that. Imaginations, these monsters that they have these amazing designs, these crazy ideas they had. Why was it conceptualized that way? An artist did that and their work shined and it was able to be appreciated by someone like me because I saw that and at the time it was everything. It's probably one of the only reasons that I cared so much about getting into VFX and eventually getting my degree. Art has driven so much of not just technology, but human beings. For this part, I'm going to get into a little bit of some interesting things. This has been around for a very long time, possibly as long as, in some ways, cave paintings, structures, and statues. And I titled that very specifically because architecture is something that it's different, it's weird, because when you think about architecture, something very specific comes into play. Now, this is very important to pretty much the rest of what I will get into, but in many ways, other pieces of art too. The stuff that I had said before also fit into this, and it's function over form. Function and form. These two things are very important to how art is presented to the world around it. In reality, you have to think about what is the point of this piece of art. When you look at a house, it needs to function. Now, how it looks, who cares? Why would you care about the shape of a box that you live in? Some people do. Many people do. From the painting that you use to the sizes of the windows and so on and the doors, function is such an important and integral part of creating a house that someone lives in. That does also come with intricate designs. It's that balance of how much design is there. Can we get as crazy as we want with it, but also keep it workable? Can I actually live in that? Can I, use it? This has been a fascinating part of the progression of design, how you see certain things being presented to the world. For example, you would look at a structure, a building from the 1500s, and you compare that to something from right now in the modern day. You look at the sizes of the doorways, to the way in which the exterior was presented to you, and then the interior. And as you look around, the types of materials used at the time to what is used now, the way houses and different buildings are presented to you. It fascinates me how much, as we become more artistic and more crazy with the way that we design buildings, it fascinates me that it still tries to be functional whilst, well, messing with everything else, let's just say. It's amazing how art has found a way to become integrated in so much of who and what we are. As human beings, every single thing that surrounds us every day, at all times, it is all fueled by art in every way. the statues that we have. It's funny because in the historical part, as I went into, many times you would have paintings made of royals and politicians and so on. Statues have very specifically only been those in most cases. In some cases, it has been mythical creatures and so on. But in most cases, most of the time, it is a politician, a royal, and so on. A lord of a location, an important figure, a message that needed to stand the test of time. That was very important, and in many ways still is. And statues sell that message every single day. They are still designed in many ways. Some get taken down eventually and have been for a very long time, but many stand tall and they tower over the everyday human just as a memory, just as a story that could not be forgotten. In terms of things that surround us, that very neatly goes into the next part. Transport and technology, two things that have become integral ways in which that we function. We cannot spend a single day without our phones in our hands, without our PC being as close as possible to us. I need access to that at all times. We are unable to explore the world around us, to see what it has to provide, to see what it has to show. There is so much of the world that is still unexplored, weirdly enough. And we are able to use our modern transport to get as close as we can to those places. It's so weird that every time we have gotten close to technology in any of its forms, being able to take its next step. Not a leap, just one step. At all times, it has been met with resistance. Cars came about in a very weird way. Now, I specifically talk about them because, well, I love cars. I love them not as ways of transport. I love them as these important pieces of art that are more than just getting from point A to point B, but it's how we are able to express ourselves in a piece of technology that has only function in mind. At least it did. How we are able to put so much design into a box that takes you from point A to point B. The fact that there is so much beauty in something like that. I love that. Now, I should have some pictures of cars at certain points in time. Now, design art is integral. In fact, it is such an important part of the function of it, by the way. Not just the form. It's not just it looks good and then that's what you're paying for. It's the fact that it looking good specifically is connected to it being functional. See, cars depend on certain things like aerodynamics. The more aerodynamic it is, the better it travels. The less fuel it uses, the less it's fighting the air. That is the whole point of it. And you see this in helicopters, you see this in planes. At all times, its purpose is to fight as little air that it can so that it can travel as efficiently as it can. And that goes into how it is designed. And you can see this throughout time. As we figured more of that out, more cars started to have a very specific look with the pointy end and so on. This was something that you can tell exactly when it was figured out and when it mattered and how far it has gotten to the days, well, of right now with what we have. Now, as technology changes and as cars transform from just being this little box that takes you from point A to point B to an electronic car that drives itself, a box that you step into that will take you from point A to point B without you interacting with it at all. Technology has come a very far way. It's very weird in some ways because it has transformed so much in such a small amount of time. People don't understand the fact that cars and your computer that you have around you, your phone that is essentially just a computer, these things have only been around for so long. Now, your phone, which is also, again, a computer, has only been, maybe the 80s, 90s into what it is in your hand right now that can actually compete with a personal computer. That blows my mind personally. And the fact that it is constantly being designed, different forms that it takes from this one is a little bit boxy, it folds and so on. Phones have gone through so many different shapes and sizes. And as it gets more technologically advanced, certain aspects of its form go away to make room for the function, but it is still being designed. Someone still sits there and draws what that tech will be. That is amazing to me. I should have a picture of one of the oldest PCs. Well, at the time would have just been a computer that had either the ability to do some calculations, just maybe almost like a calculator, which, by the way, filled a room. A whole computer, just one computer filled a whole room. That was back in the day. That's what we worked with. This would have been throughout the 40s and 50s until eventually it started to shrink and shrink and shrink until it's just a box that you keep in your room that has more power than the rocket that went to the moon, by the way. That blows my mind personally. But here's the thing. Computers have already taken another step. Something that majority of people don't really even pay attention to, but it is happening right now. Quantum computers have sort of been, at the time they would have been conceptualized, they have been made. Now, they are very hard to run. They take so much power to just run for a very short amount of time. And funnily enough, they have filled a room, because that's where we have gotten to, where computers are so advanced again for the time that they are in that they fill a room again. I should have a picture of it. And it amazes me that that is the next step in technology. That is the next step in computing. And right now, the form that it's in is what they had in the 50s, at least in design. Now, when you see the picture of it, it's fascinating that that's the brain, that thing that we see that is able to outperform so many computers at the same time. That thing that is filling a room one day will be in the hands of someone who will hold on to it and not know the value of it. Someone will carry that every day in their pocket and will think nothing of it. It fascinates me that humans are able to lose the value of the things around them and the worth of it, not in money, but the worth of it in our lives, to our lives, and the way that it is able to do so much for us. Your car will get you from point A to point B, from home to work, so you can have enough money to live. That your phone can let you film videos that you can upload to the whole world to see. You will make these silly videos. Oh, I'm filming myself right now with a bunch of lights pointed at me as I sweat up a storm so I can upload this video to the internet so I can tell people that art is cool, fascinating. We, at the moment, don't really appreciate what we have. And in many ways, in some ways we fear it, which is fair. It's fair that with a lot of that technology comes some questionable things. Now, I didn't actually want to get into this part of the video. I wasn't even going to add it, but I think it's worth mentioning since it's about art anyway, right? AI is scary in the way that it's conceptualized, the ideas that we have for it, from movies and from songs to stories that would be told and may actually continue to be told for many years. AI is very, very scary, but not for the reasons that we think that they are scary. Personally, I don't mind AI, but I fear it as much as I fear humans. We humans are extremely destructive. We are able to ruin everything that we have around ourselves. We are such a sheer force of will. We can stand against the greatest adversary, defeat it, and then turn around and become the same filth that we stood against. We do that in our every single day. Now, humans can do that and always do that. And here we are judging a piece of software that is not even AI. What we call AI currently is a language model. It is simply a piece of software that you tell it what to say, and then it will say that. It takes the information that you give it, and then it runs it against whatever programming that it has, and then regurgitates whatever the hell it could find with relation to that. AI that we know it right now is a lie in some ways. In some ways, right? From the image creators and so on, the generators and all of that, all of these are kind of a lie because all that they really do are they take what already exists and twists them. And it hurts me to say this as someone who appreciates art for as much as I can. It is fascinating. It's fascinating to take the imagination of a human being, to take all of that, condense it down into words, take those words and provide it to a piece of software, which takes that information and then slices it through all of the different amount of data that it already has in its program that it's saved. It is able to then take that, then squash it and mix it into the data that it already has, and then is able to then generate this image and now video to just simple text where you are able to almost have a full conversation with this software, all based on programming that we ourselves put into it. It is truly fascinating. Scary in some ways, but fascinating because it is not an AI, but it sure is as close as we are going to get in the near future. Now, AI as we fear it is very close. It is very close to becoming a reality where as we express ourselves with the art that surrounds us, from architecture to our fashion, to the technology that surrounds us, to our paintings, and all of those things. AI can erase all of that. It can replace all of that. And it will do both of those things. But we will do it first. Humans will do it first. And with the AI that we have right now, that is exactly what it's doing. Because you don't need propaganda anymore. You just generate an image and then suddenly you can tell a whole other story based on images that look deceptively realistic. Now, of course, we all know about the little hand issue that they have, but it can still fool enough people. That is scary. That this piece of software can bend and twist and create these creatures that once would have been in the mind of a human being just within our imagination. And the right talent, the right skill would allow you to visualize that for the rest of the world. Now we are able to see into the mind of a software fooled by ourselves that spends its time fooling human beings through human beings. Because in the end, that's all it is. We are fooling ourselves. And it's funny that we are fooling ourselves because one day we won't even be allowed to. One day we won't be able to. But I don't think that's the end of it. As scary, as dystopian as it all sounds, as depressing as some of it can sound, the most amazing thing that I see in this day and age is that where once upon a time an artist would create their piece of work, they would leave it behind, they would share it with the people around themselves who would have it and then would eventually sell it, family members and so on. Those people were never appreciated. Today, artists are always appreciated. Maybe not always, but the majority of the time, just for the talent and skill that they have, that they are able to visualize what we feel sometimes, all the way to what we see in our own minds, they are able to visualize for you. Even with how amazing these softwares are getting, humans are able to provide art with something that it is not able to carry. Art is missing one thing. It's a soul. Art is a very scary thing in that it is able to show you a moment in time. Let's just say someone drew and painted this specific room. I don't have to be in the picture. And even if I am in that scene, that picture will miss something. It's in some ways not lifeless. That's a bit obvious, but it's missing something. You can touch the painting and feel the brushes, each brush stroke against that canvas. You can feel all of it, but there is an aspect of that painting that will always be missing. It's the soul. No painting is ever able to provide you the soul. The painter can't. The painter always does. There is a way that they are able to do it, and it's something that AI can never ever do up until we make robots. And that's a different story. That I won't even get into that. That's actually also been a thing and it's always being worked on. But anyway, that completely destroys the whole point. No. No, when it comes to artists, they are able to put a little bit of themselves into it. Every one of their drawings, their paintings, all of them have them placed into it. They put a little bit of their soul, a little bit of who they are into each and every brush stroke. Because you could have two different people paint the exact same person. It will always be stylized based on that person's point of view though. That artist is able to tell you that same story their way. That is the closest we will ever get to the soul being etched into a canvas. Something that no AI will ever be able to do. Again, up until robots, but that's to be seen. I actually made this specific video for some of the artistic people that I know, and I made it as a way to say, I've seen it. I've been through a lot of aspects of art. I've experienced it, and I myself have found that you can run from it as long as you like, but your skill and your talent is something that will always belong to you. Just as the painter will etch a part of themselves into that canvas, that skill and talent is yours. That is etched into you. Use it. Why run from it? Why fear it? The software can take a lot from you, but who you are and what you put on that canvas, that will always be unique to you. It's something that no software is able to truly present to you. It can make realistic stuff, fine, but an artist is able to draw you in this beautiful way that literally nothing else can. And to all the artists out there, thank you. Thank you for giving us a part of yourself, for allowing us to appreciate your perception of the world, your perspective of the world, for being able to allow humanity to last just that bit much longer. Thank you, and thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.
Well, that was quite the story. Unfortunately, our session comes to an end. Thank you for coming in, though.
Oh, all right, I see. So will I be coming in for another session, or... Wait, huh?